Hey guys, it's Alyssa. So today I'm going to be explaining film photography, basically, just the very basics. So I'll tell you the equipment I prefer to use, plus just like the basic knowledge for if you want to shoot manual, which I recommend if you have an interest in photography. But yeah, so let's just get into this. I'm gonna try and make this like as easy to understand as possible because it's really not complicated. It's just like now it's second nature for me. But it just takes time and like practice to really understand it. But yeah, so I'm gonna try and explain all this. Someone recently actually asked me all these questions, and so I figured it'd be a good topic for a video. The camera that I shoot with is a Pentax Super program, and this was actually given to me by my dad. It was his, so I didn't have to invest in a camera, which I really appreciate. And I've only ever shot 35mm film, so that's all this video is gonna be about. I've never done like medium or large format or anything like that. I started out shooting automatic, and I recommend that for learning how to focus, because that sometimes honestly people just forget, because you'll think like you've got all the settings right and then you just totally forget to focus it. Maybe your first roll, even, because when you get a new camera you'll probably want to test it to make sure that it works, like the light meter works and stuff, because sometimes like another one of my older cameras, the light meter doesn't work, so like I have to use my phone as a light meter if I want to use that one, but I always use this one now, so I don't really have to worry about that. But yeah, so you might want to try automatic like your first roll or something, just to practice focusing, because even like when I have friends just like take a photo of me with this camera, like I'll get everything else set up and they just have to focus it. Sometimes it's like, it just takes practice to understand how it works. But basically, for focus, there is two like half circles, and whatever part of the image you want to be like the sharpest focus, the two circles need to align, so there's like a line here, and you don't want it to be like off-centered, if that makes sense. But that's the only reason I would recommend automatic. Otherwise, I think manual's the way to go. So I'm gonna start with the three like basic things you really need to know, which is ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. So for ISO, that's basically the speed of your film, and there's actually I don't really know how many different numbers are, but I'm gonna talk about 160, 400, 800. Basically the baseline I would start with is 400 because it works in any kind of lighting. So the speed of it, I guess, works in any kind of lighting, and it's gonna be like a medium grain. Yeah, it's just the most convenient, works in any light. But 160, so that's gonna be a slower film, but it's gonna have less grain, which I'm starting to prefer. But again, like if you're gonna shoot in low lighting or at night, it's gonna take longer. It's gonna need a longer exposure to make the image. So it's better for like bright light. And then 800 is the fastest, so you would have like the shortest shutter and everything, but it's gonna have the most grain. So the grain is somewhat of a preference, because like when you're shooting digital, you don't really want grain. So if you've been doing digital, you're probably gonna want something more like 160. But if you're just starting out with film, I would recommend starting with 400, and then from there you can make the decision to shift around. I've never shot 800, so I can't like say if I like it or not, but I prefer 400 or 160. When you're choosing your film speed, make sure on your camera, like this is where you'll adjust your ISO like to match the speed of film that you're using, so that way your camera is giving you light meter readings that match the film speed. So as far as types of film goes, I use Ilford HP5 at 400 speed for black and white. This is what I learned black and white with. I don't really shoot it anymore, but I do recommend that if you're gonna shoot black and white. And like I was saying earlier, Aperture 160 is best for brighter light, and it's gonna have the least amount of grain. And I've never used any other 160 film, but I like Aperture. Aperture 400 is definitely my go-to film. The colors are really soft and natural looking, and it's like a very good speed film for any lighting conditions. And the Fuji Color Superior Extra is pretty similar to Portra 400. The colors are a little more saturated, but they do sell this at Walmart, so you don't have to worry about like ordering anywhere, so it's a good backup. So then we've shutter speed, and that's how fast the shutter like closes. So basically 60 is the lowest, or 1/60th of a second basically is what it is. That's the lowest you can go without using a tripod or shooting something in motion. So like if you're shooting a person, you probably don't want to do anything lower than that, because if they like barely move, they're going to be blurry. So that's the shutter you'd want to use for anything that's moving, or if you're not using a tripod. But basically, rule of thumb, the lower the number the shutter is, the longer it's going to be open. And this is good for like anything with low light. So for example, I have this photo that was taken in an abandoned building, and this would definitely have been used, I think it was probably at 60, because I know I wasn't using a tripod, and in order to get any of the detail inside with that bright light outside, I needed it to be a pretty slow shutter, but not so slow that it was blurry without a tripod. So like this photo of the gas station, that was also a low shutter, and this was on a tripod, so I think it honestly was probably like maybe 30 seconds or something, and you can tell that it was open for a long time because you can see the light streaks in the back from the cars that drove by. If we look at like this photo I took at Lake Louise, this was probably like 1/500th of a second for the shutter speed, because there was plenty of light. And then also you can see this one, so the yellow taxi is definitely moving because it's not at the stoplight yet, but it looks frozen and sharp, so it had to be 60 or above in order for it to be sharp, and it probably was higher than that because it was bright outside. But again, so one thing to note, the light meter in your camera will tell you like if you're letting in enough light or not. So you don't have to just like guess. Or also, if your light meter does not work in your camera, which you won't know until you've shot a roll of film, you can also use like an iPhone light meter. There's like apps for it. But yeah, so you don't have to like guess all this stuff. Your camera will tell you, and it's hard because I've used multiple film cameras and none of them are exactly alike, so I can't really tell you like this is how your light meter is gonna look, but you'll always be able to see it once you're looking in the viewfinder, which is like this little part. So as far as controlling the shutter speed, on my camera it's these two buttons, and you press the top one to make it higher and the bottom one to make it lower. Right now it's set to 1/125th of a second, as you can see in the little screen right there, but it will be different on different cameras. So then moving on to Aperture. Aperture is probably the most confusing because it's just kind of hard to explain, and it does multiple things, but it's not too bad. Don't worry, guys. Hi, so I screwed up when I was explaining this in the actual clip, so I'm gonna voice over it. Basically, Aperture just controls how large or small the opening of the lens is. You can think of it as like if it's a small hole, like less light's gonna get through than if you have like a large hole. The weird thing though is the numbers, like the f-stops, are kind of like the opposite. So an f-stop of 16 is gonna be like a really small hole, but then if it's 5.6, it's gonna be like pretty big. So then with depth of field, that's the only way you're gonna see a difference in the appearance of your image based off of the aperture. So the smaller number, so we're just gonna stick with 5.6 and 16 because that's pretty standard. The smaller number, 5.6, is gonna have a smaller or shallower depth of field. So for example, this image taken in New York, the lady that's like closest to me, she's like really blurry, which means I had a shallow depth of field, and the man on the bike and like the building back there, that's what I hadn't focused. But then if you look at this image of this building, both the trees that were close to me and then this really tall building that was like pretty far back, they're both in focus, taken with a larger number, so f16, and that's basically called a greater depth of field because you can see more. Also, this lamppost taken inside of a restaurant, this was taken with 5.6 or something along those lines, f5.6, because you can tell that like the tables and chairs in the background, the windows and stuff are less focused, but then the lamp is focused, and also I'm shooting in low light, so I needed to be able to let more light in without using a tripod, because I was like literally sitting at the table and I wasn't gonna get a tripod out. So yeah, this image I feel like is a good way to understand both sides of what Aperture does. Yeah, so the last thing you need to know is how to load the film, and I was gonna show that, but unfortunately I have like 10 shots left on this roll, and I am not like haven't had time to shoot it before filming this. But also every camera is a little bit different, and so it may or may not help you if I show you how to load it in my camera unless you get a Pentax Super program. I highly recommend just looking up a YouTube video based off of your personal camera, because it'll save you time other than trying to like figure it out based off of how I do it with my camera. It's not too hard, but it's also not uncommon to mess it up. I mean, I have messed up multiple times trying to load film. So again, it all takes practice. So especially when you're first starting out, I recommend shooting digital as well, because if you see something you really like and you feel like you got a really good shot, but then something happens to your film roll, then I mean, you've lost the image, so that kind of sucks. So I guess also is once you've shot a whole roll of film, getting it developed. So I have never self-developed color film. I've only done black and white film. So I always send mine generally to MPix, which you just request mailers from them, and the mailers are free, and then you send it to them, and it's pretty reasonably priced. I want to say it's like $7 a roll or something for them to develop and upload it, and then you can order like CD format, or you can just download it or order prints, whatever you're feeling. But I also recommend looking for like local places. I've done that once on my most recent, I guess, order of rolls. I did a local shop, and they did a great job too. So definitely check out local places, because they'll probably be a little bit faster, especially if you can just go in and drop it off rather than having to send it and like wait for them to send you the mailers first and then send it off and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't recommend Walgreens. People lose their, like, Walgreens has lost their film rolls before, and that would be really disappointing. So I don't really recommend doing that. I've done Walgreens once and the quality was fine, but I've had no problems with MPix, so that's like my #1 recommendation for you. So hopefully this is not too confusing. It definitely takes practice. I've like had multiple photography classes in school, and then I've like shot a ton, so I feel like I have a lot of experience and it's become kind of second nature. But if you're new to this, it's very overwhelming at first, but you'll get the hang of it. So feel free to leave me any questions down below. I'd be glad to answer them, and stay tuned for more videos. Bye.